Good morning, everybody. I hope you're having a fantastic day. Last video we did, the two of us looked absolutely miserable the whole time. We were scowling at each other, it looked like. So we're
At
going to
least
try
according
to,
to Facebook.
yeah, we're going to try to smile a little bit more this time. Last week we talked, during teaching tips, we talked about the three different types of students, the strong-willed student, I can't even remember now. This week we're going to talk about the gifted student, the delayed student, and the special needs student. And so the gifted student, what would you consider to be the gifted student?
Well, sometimes they lump in a lot of definitions of a gifted student, and
Okay.
so that can be a wild range, actually. For our purposes here, we're going to talk about the kid who just excels not just a little bit, but a lot in at least a couple of subjects. So
Okay.
a kid that, learns to read super early, takes on information, has a vocabulary usually way beyond their years, that sort of thing. The difficulty in talking about the gifted student is that on the flip side, some gifted students can also have learning disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So it gets kind of complicated. So we're not going to necessarily delve into the learning disabilities that can accompany a gifted student. We might touch on some things as we talk about it. So we're just going to focus on the challenges of keeping a kid that accelerating very rapidly in the realm of education. A gifted student is complex in that they don't follow a typical scope and sequence. So, we're very much about grade ranges. We're not about targeting, having to follow the normal. I'm a lost for words. Okay, this is how I like to explain grade ranges. So when it comes to your reading books, usually they're arranged on the shelf by subject, but also according to ability. Mm-hmm. So on my particular shelves, I keep together all of my board books. And then I keep together all of my beginning reader type books where each page has a sentence or two on it. And then I usually keep together all of my early chapter books. And then from there it goes into usually by topic. Mm-hmm. So I have my science books for the elementary student, my history books, I have my readers and that sort of thing. I don't have a kindergarten shelf. I don't have a first grade shelf, a second grade shelf, a third grade shelf. I have it loosely by ability, right, and by topic. But what we do with our school kids is we define very, rigidly, this is first grade, this is second grade. Mm-hmm. But life and kids in the real world don't work that way. Now, I understand the necessity of it in a classroom. I understand the necessity of it in different areas of life, but in the homeschool setting, we don't have to do that.
Right.
And so we can break free of those very narrowly defined things, and we can lead our children through a progression rather than this very narrowly defined lockstep system. Mm-hmm. And so when it comes to the gifted child, we can also think outside of the box. So a lot of times a gifted student has an area that they are particularly gifted in. Mm-hmm. So our son was very gifted in math. Anything that had to do with math, he excelled. He taught himself in kindergarten how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. At that point, we didn't realize what was going on, but he begged us to play on an older student's computer program. And she's 4 years older than him. And we're like, no, it's way too hard. You won't be able to do it. And, he finally wore me out with constantly asking day after day, can I play it today, Mom? Can I play it today? So finally, I just, yeah, you know what? Just go play it. You're not going to understand it, but go for it. And the next thing you know, he knows how to do all that. And we're like, well, where'd you learn? Well, he learned it on the computer program. So there's, you know, sometimes we're a little slow to realizing, hey, we have a kid here that really excels. He also had basically taught himself to read. He had been watching some phonics basic videos. And one day I said, you know, I probably should just show him how to connect all those sounds. And I did, and boom, he was reading. In fact, he was quite young, maybe kindergarten, first grade, and he was able to read out of Carrie's college biology books. And so his reading skills and his math skills are really phenomenal. But here's the issue. His handwriting and his hand-eye coordination were still on par with his grade level.
Right.
And so those sorts of dynamics are really difficult.
His intellectual capacity was far above his physical ability,
And
his motor
physiological,
skill. Yeah. And so still he's having to work on that even as he enters high school. He's still having to be conscious of his writing and those things.
Right. We kept handwriting going with him a lot longer, formal handwriting, a lot longer than we did the other students. He's laughing because he's milling around listening to this conversation because it pertains a lot to him. And so, yeah, I could he was really good with school and it all came easy, but reading his actual work was a challenge.
Yeah. I think dealing with the getting bored easy.
Yes.
Is one. Also, everything comes so easy that when there is a challenge,
that's a
knowing what
big
it's like
deal.
to power through, like for people like us, like me, powering through difficult situations is a normal thing.
Right.
For somebody who it comes easy for, when they encounter a situation, it's like always being on the highway and then being asked to go off road.
Right.
You just like, what's this about?
Yeah, I mean, I had to learn that as a kid in school because everything came easy. But when I hit some math concepts, it was like, whoa, what's going on here? And so it turns out I was average in math. And so I just was able to skate along until I got to more complicated things. And then I actually had to work at it. It wasn't that I wasn't capable of it. It wasn't that I wasn't smart anymore. It's just I had to approach it like everybody else did instead of being able to just, instantly get it. And so, yeah, it's definitely part of the process with a gifted student is teaching them how to get through something that they don't know instantly. Check the comments. Good morning. I see Carrie and Courtney is up on our screen and Amanda. Good morning. If I missed your name, it's just because I didn't get to see the comment. We've got just a small screen. So Carrie's struggling with her oldest.
Yeah. Says, I'm struggling with my oldest. This may not be the best place. That's okay. I know this is due to his public school experience and how that system wanted to hold him where he was. So how can I help him realize how intelligent he is and encourage him to go further?
Well, the deschooling process has to happen for both us and our students. And so when you pull a kid out of public school or even a Christian school and you begin to homeschool, it's a journey. And so everybody, your whole family is on this journey. Dad's on the journey, you're on the journey, the kids are on the journey. And so we have to start off with a mindset of understanding that as people, we change, we grow, we develop. And so this is part of the challenge, is teaching our kids that this is a journey and getting all of us out of the mindset of a public school mindset. And even if your kids have never been in public school, it still influences the way we view education. Mm-hmm. When we go to, say, a curriculum fair and there's tons of curriculum out there, and it's all set up for a classroom setting.
Right.
And so we look at that, and that's what we're accustomed to seeing. And so that's how we gauge all other curriculum. And then you come to the master books booth, and we're kind of nothing like that. And so it can be confusing for parents, but that's part of the journey, is understanding that homeschooling is different from the public school setting. So I see Carrie Bailey's question as more of a deschooling kind of a thing. It is getting out of the mindset that it's like public school. And I think that takes constant reminders, constant feedback, talking about the wins, talking about the struggles with your student, and just kind of, directing them. And when I say having these discussions in my home, a lot of times these are 1 or 2 sentences that I say to the kids. They don't have to be, okay, we're going to sit down, we're going to talk about this. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. A lot of things that I do are just little tweaks, little guiding type things. And so you're teaching and you're modeling how to approach the struggles. Mm-hmm. And so, for instance, if my student is hitting a wall where they're frustrated with something because they don't know how to face something that, they've hit something that doesn't come instantly. And so I won't necessarily come right out and tell them, oh, hey, look, you're facing something and we need to teach you how to do this. I don't usually handle it directly like that. It's usually more of a subtle modeling. Mm-hmm. And what I'll do is I'll take let's say it's a math concept, and I will actually start to ask the questions that they need to be asking themselves. So I'll say something like, well, let's take a look at it. What does this problem say? And so we'll read through it. Well, what do you already know about it? Mm-hmm. And so we'll just I'll walk them through the steps, teaching them how to approach it. And in the same thing with Carrie, something that you could do is you could say, you know what, you're really interested in this particular, I would start with something they're interested in. You really like this subject. What are some courses that we could take that you would really enjoy and you would learn a lot from? And so you can just kind of teach them through these little subtle conversations that's what we want. That's the goal. That's where we're going, rather than trying to argue with them, bringing them on board the process to start to think in that mindset, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So we're the odd couple. She was an academic elite. I was the class clown. That's how I coped. That was my survival mechanism in the classroom. I hated school, but I loved learning. She loved school and she loved learning. As we come together in homeschooling, my approach is I would if I didn't have her as my counterweight and my balance, I would be very unschooling. And I think we balance each other well. What I will say about master books, and this is where we often have the rub. Master books method is common sense homeschooling. It's don't be stupid about education. Don't push your kids too early into something just so that you can say, my kid is 3 and they can read. If your kid can read at 3, fantastic. If they don't, let them be a kid, right? Give them room for that. And in the common sense style, I think sometimes what we need to do is focus less on school and more on learning. In business, some of the times, the thing that we have to do each day is we step up to the day and we say, if I was brand new to the book publishing industry, if I was just starting this company, how would I do it? And so many times it's different than what we would have done 10 years ago when we started in the business. And homeschooling is the same way. Step up to the day and say, I'm brand new to this. I don't know anything about education. How do I teach my kid what they need to know to be successful? And approach it not so much from, we need to do grade 1, we need to do grade 2, we need to do grade 3, but let's focus on just learning. What are we learning today? And make it more about the joy of learning than about the joy of accomplishing a grade level.
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely. So.
Okay.
Rant done?
Yes, my rant is done. I got it. See, master books is interesting in that as we develop curriculum, it's based on experience. We bring a lot of experience into it, not just ourselves, but the authors, the editors, the team that puts it together. And there are some things that just aren't as important to us that are in a school classroom setting. For a teacher, what they need to have plenty of busy work. They need to have seat work that they can be doing while they work on kids who don't understand. Those types of things. And if somebody has a mindset and they're coming into homeschooling and they bring that traditional school method in, there's a little bit of conflict there, sometimes of frustration. Masterbooks works excellent for the gifted student as long as you remove the boundaries. Forget all about grade ranges. Where are they in their development? Help them learn, help them grow, throw away the grades. When they become in high school, we have to keep records and transcripts to help them move to the next level, especially if you're college bound. And so that's more of an issue. But we see a lot of these issues happening in the lower elementary and elementary levels. And sometimes I think it's just because we're trying to do high school level learning in the lower level as opposed to just letting it sort itself out. And we've seen, whether you have a gifted student or a delayed student or a special needs student, it all balances out. And it kind of comes to a bit. So
I'd like to just talk a little bit about some of the nuts and bolts and practical aspects. And so in our homeschool, we actually have 2 kids, 8 months apart, opposite ends of the spectrum. And so we have our son who is, just math and reading and vocabulary and all of that came super, super natural, just far ahead of, the normal traditional methods. And then we have our other son who struggles quite a bit. He was adopted and has fetal alcohol syndrome. He deals with not only a lot of academic struggles, but also a lot of behavioral issues. And so I'm having to take an entirely different approach with these 2 kids, and yet they're only 8 months apart. So it's been an interesting dynamic as a homeschool mom trying to figure the 2 of them out. I have to really just set one aside and say, okay, this is what I'm thinking about right now, and address the needs of this student, and then set aside that student when I go to plan the other students. So I want to talk about some of the practical things that you deal with a gifted student. So, you have the younger grades, and this kid is excelling. They're chewing up everything that they can get their hands on. And let's just narrow it down for simplicity's sake that it's math that we're talking about. It could be any subject. It could be, it could be reading. It could be sciences, whatever. But let's just keep it to math to keep it as an example. So let's say math, they're just chewing everything up. Well, one of the issues that can really discourage a gifted student is too much repetition. And so that can become boring to them. And then they will start doing things that we might not necessarily want them to do. That's when they start, teasing and disrupting the classroom. They start playing with things. They start twiddling their thumbs. They're just bored. And so we have to make sure that we're not giving them too much repetition. And that's one of the things that we've tried to address in our curriculum, where we've removed the twaddle, we've removed all of the unnecessary repetition, but yet still offer ways that you can go deeper, tools that you can provide some repetition, but not, you can practice the skills without having to do pages and pages of the same exact thing. Making every single student do that can, just kill the level of learning. And so we have to be careful with how many problems in a day. But a bigger issue, because that issue can actually be taken care of by saying, okay, just do half the problem, show me that you can do it. That's easy. But a bigger issue that we have, and I had to face this with my son, and I don't know that I did the right thing. Who knows? I mean, you really just have to seek the Lord and ask for wisdom. But a concern that I had with our son in math was he was going so quickly through it. When you get to a certain level, usually between 4th and 6th grade, they start hitting a lot of abstract concepts. Well, a kindergartner, he was ready for, he could understand the approaches and all of that to math. He could have done 4th, 5th, 6th grade work in 1st grade.
Right.
But my concern was there were so many concepts that are introduced in those levels that are abstract that he wasn't quite ready for. And I was concerned he might miss some things along the way. And so I delayed him a little bit by just expanding through multiple curriculums and just giving him plenty of math to do, and a little bit harder of a math, but in different ways of looking at math.
It wasn't drill and kill. It was things that were within his capacity, but different challenges. Critical thinking, and we were building his critical thinking skills.
Yes. And so I would get him little workbooks. I would give him just, computer games, this, that, the other thing, to help him still learn and be challenged, but not getting so far ahead that he got discouraged because he didn't have the capacity to think as abstractly as required. And at those younger ages, I didn't want him to become, he wasn't ready to face things like that. And so that wasn't the point that I wanted to teach him how to work through a challenge of something he didn't know. And so that's what I did. That there's no right or wrong way to approach these things. You have to know your kid. You have to make the best decisions that you can. And so for some, they might just let them plow through as long as they're able and just keep going until they hit that wall, and then, address it at that point. And that's perfectly legitimate too. This was just how I chose to handle it. And so he basically he's always run ahead in his math. He's had no problems with it. But now he's in high school. He's doing Jacobs. And Jacobs we've taken more time with, so that we've actually reduced. He's not ahead anymore. But it's not because he's not still gifted in math, not still good at math. It's because he's doing a lot more of the problems than a typical student would, because he can, and it's enjoyable to him. And he's learning a lot about the relationships and a lot of that abstract thought. It's very logical.
He's also expanded. He's taken to computer programming, and he's excelled amazingly into beginning to program and use different languages and stuff, which is also very technical, critical thinking, and that. So a lot of that energy, that intellectual energy, has gone into something that he's excelling at. And I will say, what's nice about it is he's also maturing emotionally at the same time. So where he was struggling at one point. And we've talked about this in the past. I think it's really important as educators, especially home educators, the concept of growth hacking. Growth hacking is where I apply a little bit of energy, see if it works. If it doesn't work, I retreat quickly and I apply energy in another area, see what works. If that's working, I apply more energy in that area. Sometimes in homeschooling, we see this a lot with curriculum. We'll invest ourselves in a curriculum and we keep forcing it into the homeschool because we want it to work, and it's supposed to work, and it's not. Our advice, even if it's Master Books curriculum, is if you come against something where it's not an issue where the kid is just not motivated, being lazy, shutting down, a behavioral issue, but it's not working for your family, is to retreat from it. Well,
sometimes retreat is just making tweaks to it. Sometimes, I mean, I have always made adjustments to the curriculum that I'm using, and I still do, even with Master Books. I adjust it all the time. And so, you want to keep the mindset that the curriculum is not the teacher. You're the teacher. You're the boss. You're in charge. And so use the curriculum, whatever curriculum it is, use it in a way that meets the needs of your student. And so I definitely did that with our son, who is gifted in a lot of areas. Now, on the flip side, we talked about sometimes those gifted kids can have delays in other areas. It's like the mind, God, we're fearfully and wonderfully made. And sometimes the mind can be really strong in one area and then have difficulty in other areas.
Mhm.
And so what I would encourage the moms and the dads to do in those cases is to gently focus on the areas of difficulty. So our son was extremely good in a couple of areas, but handwriting was an issue. And so I just played with different methods that worked for him. We talk about it a lot, like, here's what you need, not just you need to write better. But one of the issues was he wrote too lightly. And so we worked on him, the pencil,
Right.
the pressure. And so we worked on those things. And so we addressed different issues that were very specific, not just you need to make your handwriting better.
Right.
And there's lots of things out there right now. Master Books does not have handwriting other than just doing copy work, which is fantastic for improving, but we don't have anything yet. We're planning to develop some handwriting things, but there's a lot out there that you can choose from. And I didn't always give him a complete handwriting curriculum, but I would find resources that would help him develop in the areas that he needed to. And so one of the things was font size. So I found some paper that helped him grow in that area as far as understanding your letter widths, heights, that sort of thing.
What I'm hearing though is you didn't become overly attached to one of your solutions.
Right.
So if a solution is working, you took that, and sometimes it only worked for a season.
Right.
And then it didn't the next time, and you readapt.
Right.
And so every student is different.
Absolutely.
So what works for one student in our home doesn't necessarily work. I mean, it's and this ties into another question. Somebody said, what do you do when the younger child has gone beyond the older child and skill? Here's something I think we push in our home, and it's demonstrated because of who we are, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I had been in school, I probably would have, in today's environment, if I had been in school, they probably would have labeled me ADD or something of that nature. As most, if you look at a lot of business leaders, the founder of FedEx, founder of Virgin Airlines, there's so many leaders that actually either dropped out of school or struggled in school, but have excelled in life.
Yeah, and I want to take a little time out. Excelling academically is only one little area of intelligence.
Right.
People have intelligences and can do amazing things, whether or not they're good at academics.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have always felt that when there have been people around me that didn't have the same gifts as I do, I've never looked at them like they're not intelligent. They're just intelligent in a different way. You've
Right.
always been brilliant, but you're brilliant in a different way. And so, we have to look at people as fearfully, wonderfully made,
Mm-hmm.
and having unique areas of intelligence. We happen to be discussing today just one narrow little area of academic giftedness.
Right.
And it is important to be mindful because of this particular question. What if a child is excelling academically ahead of another child?
Right. And we celebrate, as a family, we celebrate the differences. So yes, we have a gifted student. He's great in academics, and he surpassed his sister. But his sister was amazing at making people feel good around her. She had an emotional and social intelligence
Mm-hmm.
that exceeded anybody else in our family. I mean, she just has a social intelligence. Then we have others that they're just very good at other things. And so, while academic is one portion of it, we're not competitive. We appreciate each other's differences. Both of our differences combined make us a super team, I believe, and always have, because we bring balance to each other, and teaching our kids that, hey, we're all unique and we're all individual, and God gave us strengths and talents. And no matter where you go in life, there's always going to be somebody smarter, somebody more beautiful, somebody more gifted. That's not what it's about. It's about using my talents and my strengths that God has given me to accomplish everything he set before me. And I think it's a good teaching opportunity for our kids to have to learn that. Maybe my 2-year-old brother or 2-year younger old brother has just surpassed me because he's good. Let's celebrate that with him. Let's celebrate that his strength is academic intelligence and that he gets these concepts easy. But then we can also celebrate my strengths and my abilities and what I bring to the family and to the team.
Yeah, and it reminds me of a pet peeve that I have.
Okay. Why are you looking at me when you say that?
No, because I'm just thinking. We like, it's popular in culture that we need to tell our kids they can do anything, they can be anything. They can't.
Right.
They can't. It's not true. It's not truthful. And so that comes into play, that we have this mindset. We want to encourage our kids to be all that God created them to be.
Mm-hmm.
That's perfectly acceptable. But there are limitations because God made us each individually with a purpose and a plan for our life. And we can't do anything we want to do. And so there are limitations. And we have to teach our kids that limitations do not equate to failure in life.
Right. Doesn't mean we encourage being Debbie Downers. I mean, it's that the realistic expectations
right.
of what does the job require, what does the skill require, do I meet those requirements?
Right. And, there are areas that we can work really hard and we can work to overcome some things. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying put up roadblocks and saying you never can, but there's certain ones of our children that are the chances of them becoming a doctor are pretty slim. And there's kids of them becoming a basketball player are pretty slim. And I'm not just saying the dynamics of trying to get onto a good team. I'm just saying ability alone. It's just not going to happen. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm not going to tell my very uncoordinated child, you should try to become a basketball player. We might work on those skills and we might improve a lot. And maybe if they decide to eat, sleep, and, play basketball, who knows?
Right.
But to tell the kid, yeah, you can be anything, you can do anything, it's just not truthful.
I agree.
And so we have to be careful with that. And I think that we have to give our kids the tools. And that, you'll hear me say that a lot, is giving tools. And that's because our kids, I don't like this concept of, okay, this is what you have to know, memorize, and understand, because that's good in that little moment. Mm-hmm. I always laugh at the people, they'll go out on the streets and interview something about American history, and then they make fun of these people. Some of them are pretty bad. But how many people could regurgitate very specific facts? They might have a broad understanding, but very few of us in today's day and age can just spit out facts.
Right.
But if you ask those same people, hey, I want you to give me a 5-minute summary of something, they know where to get that information. Mm-hmm. And they can think through those topics. And that's more important to me than being able to randomly spit out a bunch of facts. And so it's the same way with some of these issues of what we're discussing here, of our kids having different abilities. It's giving them the tools, because they're going to encounter different abilities their whole life. Like you said, they're always going to come across somebody who's smarter than them or whatever. And so it's giving them the tools. Okay, how do I deal with those things when they come about? And this is something that's not taught in schools. But we as homeschoolers, we see it unfolding, and have the ability to step in and help navigate that. And this is a huge part of having kids that are not the average, which I know you hate the average because there's no such thing as average. But there is a typical progression of education. And when kids are outside of those typical areas, such as the gifted kid or the kid who's struggling, it's really important to give those kids those tools on how to deal with those sorts of things.
Right.
We have to talk them through it.
Well, it's part of emotional health, right? And so we have this idea, and this is going, we've already gone pretty long on this, so we're going to end up having to do another, but a lot of people wanted us to touch on the two, so I'm going to bring in some of it. We have this idea in life that everything is going to be perfect, that we're always meant to be happy. We're meant to love everything we do, and that our life is going to be perfect. And the reality of life is that's not true. We live in a fallen and broken world, and we look forward to perfection in eternity, but that doesn't exist here. And teaching our kids that realistic expectation, I think, is part of emotional health that even a lot of us as adults lack in getting a grip on reality. When we talk about the delayed student, we're talking about a student that just hasn't emotionally developed yet. They're not emotionally, mentally ready for develop. And part of that for us, the Heart and Carrie Bailey, who's put together the developmental kindergarten, that kindergarten program is more about preparing the student to learn than actually starting heavy into the learning process. A lot of our approach is start off a little bit slower and build momentum as the child develops the intellectual, social, emotional capacity and stamina to actually learn. So I want to come back next week and I want to talk a little bit more about some of those. Just touching briefly on it, what I would say is if you have a child who's maybe 6, 7, 8 years old and they're just not clicking yet, don't give up hope today, because we've seen with our kids, some kids get it and they're on par. You have the outliers that go a little bit outside and they just late bloomers, right? If I could go to kindergarten when I was 40, I would have been a star student. I would have been able to keep up with Kristen and Anna and the rest of you. But unfortunately, my parents thought it was wise to put me in kindergarten at age 5 and watch me struggle. So when I just late bloomers, it's not about, the end game is so much bigger than kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and those identifiers. So don't give up, and we'll come back to that.
Yeah, there's a saying that circulates within the homeschool world, especially those of us who deal with curriculum. And when we owned our business, this came up a lot. We would get a phone call, what's the best math curriculum? Because we sold lots of different ones. What's the best reading curriculum? And the answer is the third one.
Right.
And it's not because, it's not a curriculum issue. It's a child development issue. And so by the time enough time and development has passed, you get to the third curriculum, it's just that the student was ready to learn.
Right.
And so a lot of what we bump up against when it comes to some of these things are developmental issues, not curriculum issues.
Right. And I would say even in the areas of diagnosis with physicians and outside people, because we've been in the special need realm and we knew the backstory, so we watched a physician diagnose our student pretty much according to what we said we felt. He gave some layers, but we saw other students with exactly the same challenges, the same backgrounds, and they would be labeled with a completely different diagnosis, a different label. Be careful not to accept too many labels for your students. Just educate the student you have, right, and the challenges that you have. So as we move towards special needs, and I want to talk about this more next week because it's such an important topic, the one thing that we've learned, and it was we had expectations because up to this point, all of our students fit the average, so to speak. And then all of a sudden we end up in a special needs situation. And the biggest challenge we had was realistic expectations.
Mm-hmm.
It was not imposing on him the same standards of his gifted brother and educating the individual student. Now, there's a lot of challenges that have come from having to educate a special needs student, and and you've excelled at that. And I really want to get into that. I want to get into some that have asked about testing and what we do for for the like the standardized testing and stuff. So we'll go back through and answer some of the questions you have. Next week, we're going to go higher into it, but kind of a seed for thought is that expectations. And this is with all of our kids.
Yeah.
I think we have a preconceived idea of what we expect, and sometimes we have to let go of that and bring a bit more of a mindset of the individual student, and especially if there's challenges, being able to say, okay, let's educate what we have, not what we wish we had, and what is the end goal, what's important. And sometimes for the gifted student who's able to do programming and all of these things, and we know that, the potential to go into business or to go to college or whatever is there, we educate differently than the student who is going to struggle in those areas, has a different intelligence or different capacity. College prep may not be on the horizon there. Life skills are more on the horizon that we faced. And letting go of the dreams of college, of family, of some of those things, and actually accepting where we were, but not discounting that God still had a plan and still has a plan, individual, unique, and special for each student. So yes, the college track and the business track and the exceptional track may be the plan that God has for one student. But that doesn't mean that the student that doesn't have that capacity, or at least hasn't been able to break through that
takes
yet.
a much slower path too.
Right. It doesn't mean that God doesn't have a special path. And we've seen that with our kids too, where the one that was challenged academically the most, who coincidentally about age 13 just like came out of nowhere and is the one that graduated, like all the work done, good grades, just all of a sudden, like, where'd this come from? But it just all clicked, right? But from a very young age could make people feel loved and special and valued. And God had a special plan for her, and it didn't necessarily have to be academics. So I'll let you address that before we close out.
What am I addressing?
Just the realistic expectations.
Yeah, with our special needs son, what I always like to say is I shoot for the moon, but I'm happy if we get 2 inches off the ground, and sometimes we fall into a pit. But the goal is to go as far as you can without loading on frustration. And some of that requires some discernment as to what you're actually, is it can't or is it won't, and those two things have to be addressed differently. And so whether you have a gifted student or whether you have a special needs struggling student or just an average student, it's understanding that there's going to be differences in abilities. Even within average kids, there's going to be some kids that just do better with math or do better with writing. And so balancing all of that balancing it is more of a challenge when they're not in the typical progression of things, when they progress differently. And so it's just, it takes some time and thought. I actually found it more challenging to develop an academic plan for a gifted student than I do my challenge student, because the kid who has a challenge can only go so far so fast. So you're limited within those confines. With the gifted child, the sky's the limit. And so you're just trying to wrap your head around what you're even dealing with and how far is too far.
Right.
And so you have to answer different questions when you're analyzing and you're working through the process of the academics for each of these two types of students. And so you definitely have to consider the whole child. You have to analyze the strengths, the weaknesses, where they actually are and what your goals are for the year. Like you've talked a lot about goal setting, and it's really important to sit down and figure out some goals for the whole child, not just in each individual subject. And so that's where some of the life skills come in. But life skills are important regardless of what kind of student. And we sometimes forget about that in our planning. But for a kid that struggles, those life goals, it's really crucial that we include those in our evaluation of their academics. For the gifted kid, sometimes communication can be an issue that we have to work on. Some of those types of things that may be a stumbling block, we want to include, because our kids are whole people with strengths, weaknesses, personalities, differences, and we want to strengthen those weaker areas and challenge them in their strengths.
Right. The thing that makes you unique as a homeschool mom is, okay, and Carrie Bailey is part of this discussion today, so I'm sure she could weigh in with this. If I only teach kindergarten, or I only teach 5th grade or junior high history, every year I'm teaching the same subject to the same age of student, to the same, with the same expectations. As a homeschool parent, you are teaching kindergarten, K through 12, 5 subjects or 6 subjects, and you're teaching a much more holistic approach. So we've graduated 5 students, 5 very different individuals, but we've gone through the entire spectrum with them as we bring up the next 4 children that were in school right now with us. They're each unique and they're different. And so realizing that this is a much more holistic approach, if you will, that it's not just one subject, the same group of kids. You actually are having to develop something new every year to create a win for your student. That's something that the traditional education just can't relate to because it's not there. And the more we bump into traditional educators, we see that they're intimidated sometimes by the education because it's bigger than one subject or it's bigger than one grade level. Something that we did when we pastored at the church, we called ourselves the Church of Misfit Christians for obvious reasons. I was the pastor, but the mantra there was really about growth and room for growth. And we weren't perfect people. We were people growing and people giving each other room for growth. And I would say in your homeschool, no matter what you're facing, whether it's strong-willed children, the lazy kid, the gifted kid, the special needs kid, you name it, you're not perfect. Give yourself room for growth. Your kids aren't perfect. Give them room for growth. Your husbands aren't perfect. Give them room for growth. And as long as you pray and ask the Lord for wisdom and discernment, as long as you seek counsel, wise counsel, the Proverbs tells us in the counsel of many, there's wisdom. It's good to seek counsel and ask for advice. But overall, the Holy Spirit trumps, and then giving each other room for growth. So we've had some years that have been phenomenally successful. We've had some years that were just, Lord, get us through the day, one day at a time.
Yeah, I think it's helpful if we look at the individual years as our sprints and, getting them to graduation as the marathon. Yes. And to realize we might not have had the fastest speed and the most successful sprint, but we're not in this for the individual sprints. We're in it for the marathon. And so we've got a lot of years to continue to progress towards the end.
And homeschooling doesn't stop when we give a diploma. So we've found that, well, I wish I had a textbook that we could still force them to sit at the desk and do. Into their 20s, we're still educating, preparing, grooming, and releasing. Right. Get that mindset early on, right? That this is preparing them for life.
And homeschool's a lifestyle.
It really is a lifestyle. And the sooner, like for our approach in the Master Books method is really very applied learning, growth. It's the focus is on learning, not on the grades. So we went long again. This next week we will continue the discussion on the delayed student, and I would just say the late bloomer. a little bit about the late bloomer. Probably don't need to talk as much about that as we do about the special needs. If you have a special needs student and you're not part of the discussion in the moms in the special needs group that Master Books has, I would encourage you to join that group. We'll put a link here as well so you can see that. And there's some fantastic discussion that occurs over there, some support, because if you are in a special needs situation, the discussion is different, and sometimes we don't remove it from the moms of Master Books because it's not acceptable. We just want to provide more support for those families where they can have the freedom to discuss the challenges that they have, because it's a head game as much for the parent educator as it is for the student. And so we want to provide that support as well for those parents. So hopefully this was helpful. And thank you.
You're welcome.
And we appreciate you as always and being part of this discussion. We'll go back through and answer any questions we can. And if there's something that you want us to discuss further, be sure to comment. Thank you. Thank you for being awesome, but maybe you could discuss this. That works really well. Okay. God bless you guys. Have a fantastic day, weekend. We certainly pray the Lord's blessing and favor on everything you guys are doing. Bye-bye.